The next presentation will be given by Lisa Kemmerer. She is Associate Professor of Philosophy and Religions at Montana State University, Billings. She is author and editor of 7 books and nearly 30 scholarly articles. I hope I pronounced that right. This presentation connects animal advocacy with other social justice movements, indicating the importance of a wider activist awareness, of sensitivity among activists to other forms of oppression, such as ableism, racism, heterosexism, and classism. Please welcome Lisa Kemmerer.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here and for the organizers and all their incredible hard work. It's much appreciated. These events are important. Education is one of the cornerstones of bringing change, and when we get here and share ideas, it's so important to all of us. I know it's really important to me. So today I want to talk about the links of oppression. So I want to talk about different types of oppression. I may focus a little more on sexism, but then again I may not. I want to hang it on the idea of ecofeminism, so I'll start there. But let me also begin by saying, if I don't enunciate well enough, if I get going and I'm speaking faster than the speed of light, please tell me, raise your hands, do something, give me a signal. Obviously I would like to be, I'm trying to say something, I'm trying to communicate something, so if I'm not doing it, let me know, and I will try to calm down and slow down and speak properly. So ecofeminism, let's start there. Ecofeminism is an idea that was made by people like Carol Adams and Josephine Donovan and Marty Keel and Greta Gard, some powerhouse female thinkers who started to realize there was a connection between the oppression of women and the oppression of the natural world. How many of you have heard about ecofeminism? Hands up if you know about it. See, this is a wonderful thing that this is well known. Or it's getting to be well known. All right, it's well known in this room. All right, so they figured out through things like animal husbandry, the way we're treating the natural world, the way that men are treating women. They looked at things like virgin forests. They looked at the rape of nature. And they started to look at how there was a dualistic worldview, a vision where things are divided into 2 categories. And it kind of starts with male and female. Clear. There's male, there is female. It's nonsense, of course, but that's where it starts. That's what they noticed, was that we had this dualistic idea. And then on the side of the not male, where female is, was stacked a whole lot of other things, including the not rational, nature, not human, not Caucasian, whatever it is, not rich, not property owning. All the things that are devalued were in the not category. And on the other side, you had basically the powerful white male. Okay, so that's the idea of dualism, and it became a hierarchy, a situation where things are above others. They aren't just separate, they're also placed in an order where one thing is put over another. From that, Carol Adams is my favorite thinker in this area, but again, among those women, they started to realize that ecofeminism, through that, they could make connections with speciesism, that it isn't just women in nature, that in fact, along with the original complaints that the women had, you could certainly see a parallel that animals were also included in that. That in the dualism and hierarchy, they were in the not human category, and they were put as lesser and lower, as expendable, as devalued. And as soon as something is devalued, it becomes exploitable, expendable, something that can be used by others, just as women had been used by men for labor, for reproduction. Animals were also used for labor and reproduction. Not to mention their bodies have been used in other ways as well. And the best examples of this, of course, in speciesism is eggs and milk. Specifically because they're females, they are exploited longer and more horrifically than other farmed animals. So if you're looking for where the greatest suffering is, it's going to be in the battery cage. It's going to be in the dairy farm. It's going to be where females are exploited specifically because of their female anatomy. that is where you will find the greatest suffering. And one of the reasons for this is because they live longer. The males are picked off young and killed. And when you're treated absolutely horrifically, being dead is better than being alive in some situations. And when you're a dairy cow, you're impregnated every year, and your calf is stolen every year, and you are milked 2 times a day. It's just a litany of misery, day in and day out, for a very long time. Whereas the little boy calves in veal, of course, they suffer horribly, males and females. Some of the females also go to veal. But it's short. It's short as opposed to a long bout of absolute misery. So the veal is part of the dairy industry and part of why it is horrific. Note that the females suffer longer, and they suffer simply because they are females, because they're born into bodies that are female bodies. I would also say, well, this is going to tie in with, I want to talk about not just speciesism, I said, but the other connections. So I want to look at racism, ableism, ageism, and make connections with those back to speciesism and connect it with ecofeminism. So let me look at some of these others straight up. So with racism, obviously, again, you have Caucasian, not Caucasian. So you have the dualism, you have the hierarchy, then you have the exploitation for labor, reproduction, used as wet nurses, used for experimentation, a guy named Sims, used females, I think Danielle's going to talk about that in one of his presentations, but used females to look at female reproduction and used individual females many times for experiments and is heralded as, you know, the father of gynecology, despite the horrific things done. So looking at, again, the same pattern of devaluation, dualism, devaluation, exploitation. The other thing I want to say about racism is that another way we see this in the animal world is through color. I am the tender of a completely impossible black female pit bull mix. There's no question why she stayed at the shelter a very long time. Not just her behavior problems, but the fact that she's black and female. So she had all these strikes against her, and she was just nuts on top of it. And so when I went to the shelter, I said, "Who can't you home?" And everybody just looked right to her. There she was. Nuts, crazy. I can't help but smile when I think of her. She's a beautiful, wonderful dog. But everyone knows that if you want to see the dog sitting the longest in the shelter, it's going to be the black dog. And it's going to be a pit bull mix, and it's going to be a female. So again, we have all these preconceived notions, these divisions. You know, there's no reason for that. Anyone who's ever known a pit bull is like, what? And I mean, I was afraid to adopt her at first because I'm on my own and have to tend her, and she's impossible. And okay, she is a bit much for me. She can knock me over and does. But she's safe. She's wonderful. So the prejudices that we carry from race actually are connected in that way. How many of you have a black dog? Yay. A black cat? Oh, good. Give them a good cuddle from me. They all need their cuddles. Of course, cuddle the other ones too. They all need it. All right, so looking at racism and recognizing the connections there with experimentation, reproduction, and how we view difference and dualism. All right, and I forgot to mention heterosexism. Let's go there next. So again, we have dualism. We're going to see those who are heterosexual and those who are not heterosexual. So anything that isn't, right? And there's a whole list of things that can fit over there. Anybody who's not straight up heterosexual fits in the other category and is devalued. All right, now I live in Montana. Just below Montana is Wyoming. This is the place where Matthew Shepard lived and died. Who knows the story of Matthew Shepard? All right, brutally, absolutely brutally tortured and murdered because he was gay. And of course, it's Cowtown, and you can't be gay, you can't be different. If you are, you better not admit it. So he was expendable to those who saw him as in the not a category. It was insufferable. Now, recognizing the point here of reproduction, that when you hold reproduction as critical, and when, if you look back through history, the churches have wanted warm butts in the pews, and the armies have wanted boots on the ground, and so you need your people to be reproducing. This is what's valued, and we're all pressured to reproduce. Unless you have wonderful parents like mine who let you be who you want to be, there's a lot of pressure in our community to reproduce. And so this is part of the problem, this is part of what feeds into prejudice against those who are not in the hetero norm, is that they're not reproducing. So Matthew Shepard's an example of that. There's also, I wanted to give an example of a little kid that was born who was a hermaphrodite. So having male and female sex organs. And of course, I don't remember which state this was in, maybe North Carolina or something. But of course, dualism, they right away, this can't be. This isn't, we can't have this. You got to be one thing or the other. In our black and white world, with our dualism, we've got to make this person something, and he is a not A. So what did they make the little child? Right, he's not A. You tell me, what did they decide the child had to be? Had to be a female, right? Because A is the norm, and that's male. That's where everything that has power goes, Caucasian, male. Everything over here is the A side. The not A side is everything that isn't the norm. So the child had to be a female. So they turned the child into a female because it didn't qualify as a straight-up male. The kid's now 12 years old and is wondering when his penis is going to grow because he's very clear that he's a male. So this is an example of dualism and the effect it has just on people, let alone on other creatures. So through Matthew Shepard and this little boy, we see this idea of dualism. And of course with animals, and again, I come from Cowtown, and I know that when the ranching lands that I walk on, when the guys, they do the artificial insemination and force the females to, for about 6 years, they have babies, and it's cattle used for food, so they stay around about 6 months and then they're sent off to be killed. But when they're forcing pregnancy on the females, the ones who don't take, right? They don't take, they can't be forced to be pregnant, it doesn't work. They're sent to slaughter because they're not worth anything. They are their reproductive organs. They are instruments of production. So again, if we could lose this idea, you can see the connection between this idea that reproducing is important, and most of us live in communities where we get that. But that spreads to hurting both those who aren't heterosexual and those who are being exploited as, for reproduction, as in the farming communities. Classism. Oh yeah, I had to add that one too. Classism is a really important problem that we don't talk about a lot. A form of oppression, again, dualism, denigration. So if you're poor, if you don't have land and property, you end up in the not A side, you become a servant, and you're devalued. And I see this all the time in how we treat people who are basic servants, and it just drives me wild. People who are around me know it, because I get cranky if people aren't polite to those who are standing behind counters doing hard jobs for all of us. That kind of rudeness comes from this form of oppression where you're in that not A category, and you can be treated differently. And one of the ways they're treated is, you're here to work for me, do it, and I don't necessarily have to apply for you. And if something goes wrong, I'm going to yell at you. Never mind that you're following the rules of the people above you who tell you everything you can and can't do. You're the one who's going to catch my anger. So that kind of treatment of people that are disempowered, recognizing that link with classism, that they are in the not A category. They are exploited. Sorry, they're exploited by really pretty much everyone as cheap labor. And we often forget to treat them with the decency that we treat others, and it is unacceptable. Looking at, reminding that animals, again, making that link. Animals are in that category of not A for class. They are among the poor. They don't have things. They don't have that power of things in production and money. They aren't the ones hiring and making the rules. So the link here again is that we don't need to treat those well who don't have the power to make the rules, who don't have the voice, and recognizing that that trickles down. That when you have the idea that you can mistreat other people, you will soon find yourself mistreating other animals, that you will find that they're categorized in the same way, and those are some of the links of oppression. Yes? Yes, I will try. And remind me again if I forget. Yes, okay, thank you. All right, so trying to speak slower. Oh, and I know I do need to. It's very important. I'm speaking English and I'm language challenged, so I need to be thoughtful of those who are listening to a language that is not their own, at least not their first. All right, so the next one I want to look at is ageism. All right, so again, and this is one I really can't speak to how it is here in Europe, but there's a lot of really devaluing those who are older in my own culture. And you can just see it everywhere in the media and in life, and how we treat each other and how we warehouse, we put into institutions those who are older, that we don't value them. We don't really care about knowledge in our culture. We care about looks, material items, what you have, appearances. You know, it's nonsense, and it needs to be said. It needs to be put on the table. And this ageism, it especially affects females. So again, this is the ties where sexism runs straight down through a lot of this, that women are the ones in the lower class. They're the ones without the power and the jobs. They're the ones who, when they're older, they can't reproduce. And if you can't reproduce, reproduction, it's all about money and things and property, you are devalued. So recognizing that females bear the brunt of this as well, the ageism that we have, this focus on youth, that somehow being, looking right and maybe having all of your physical strength is more important than the wisdom, and to be devalued as you age. And again, this is really important to animal exploitation. When the animals have been exploited for dairy or eggs for X number of years, these are females being exploited, they are no longer considered, it's not that they're done reproducing, it's that they can't reproduce as well, as fast. They're not as profitable, that's the word. So as soon as they're not profitable, they are shipped off to death. They then go the way of all the males went when they were much younger. So again, those are the links between ageism, the focus on youth, and the devaluing of those who are older, and how it affects women more, and how it affects non-human animals. And I guess I want to say one more thing about this. In the movement, there's a tendency to pick on each other, to fight with each other instead of focusing on now I'm all for discussion and dialogue. But I get a little offended that some of the older philosophers that have done just amazing things to get this movement on its feet become devalued and either aren't invited to talks or are overtly trashed, because when they got started, all of the ideas like feminism, the male philosophers are trashed because they're not feminists. Well, okay, that's a mistake. Point it out and move on. Be glad for what and don't forget to thank them for what they did give us. So remembering that, I'm looking forward to the day when someone's going to say, and here's what you didn't get, because I know there's probably more than one thing that we in this movement are missing now. We can count on it. So a little humility is good, and I think part of the ageism is remembering that those who have come before us, you can't really understand their world, some of them trashed by the things that they've seen and had to deal with. The stress of the movement, fighting when there was no money, and now veganism is so different than it was 30 years ago. So another slice of ageism is looking at how we in the movement treat those who have been in this movement for 20 or 30 years and maybe don't always appreciate, because they have offered us, they've handed us down things we've built on, we sometimes fail to appreciate what they did give us. And being critical is good, being too critical can be hurtful. Ableism is the final one. And I'm really glad that someone pointed out that maybe ableism isn't one you know. Ableism is these are the isms. Ableism is those who are not abled in the same way. So ableism holds that those whose arms don't work as well, or vision isn't as good, or their brain can't reason as well, that they are disabled. So ableism holds that they can't produce as much. They can't do as much. They can't give to the world as much. So they're in the not A category. They're devalued as less productive and as dependents. And again, I hope you're hearing the trigger words for animals. When you're less productive or dependent, you are devalued. And so these attitudes carry over. And I can say, as someone who has a vision problem, I've actually had one of the leading now speakers in these ideas of oppression, intersections, has failed to recognize her own, I will say, unkindness to me on this point. And it's something I'm used to. Everyone says, oh, you got to read this, you got to read that, you got to read more. And I'm like, give me a break. Reading's hard for me. It's a struggle. It's not easy. So again, recognizing that not everybody's the same as you. Most of you are probably terrific readers. I find that in the movement. But know that not all of us are terrific readers. So some of us aren't going to have read everything that everyone else has read, and it doesn't mean that we're dumb, lazy, or somehow disinterested in the movement. There's other reasons, and maybe it's a less visible disability. But remember, too, that all the things that each of us have that make us different come with their gifts. So disabled, again, it's a focus on this idea of production and reproduction. And if whatever you have somehow doesn't feed into that, it's less valued. Recognizing it for what it is and seeing how it affects animals. In this case, they are also more apt to be seen as dependents, as not having things like reason, as not being able to read books. But you can turn it around. For one thing, you have to say, we don't really know what they've got. We don't know how they reason. I'm quite sure they reason, and evidence is showing that they reason. So it's pure arrogance on our part to assume that. But we can also say, wow, look at that, a world without books. Those smart, lucky animals, they're having a life without books. So it's your perception of what you value, and recognizing that as part of our cultural heritage. All right, so that's the list of things that I think I want to put, and as I say, I have no doubt that if in 10 years or 20 years, or even right now, there will be people who will add things to this list. That's good. We need to recognize oppression where we see it, see these links with dualism, with a hierarchy where things are devalued, they're exploited based on certain assumptions that we have, like the idea of production and reproduction. Now, I'm a person where ideas are wonderful. They're fun. I'm a philosopher. I have a great time with them. But at the end of the day, when the rubber hits the road, sorry, that was too fast. When it comes right down to basics, the question is, what does it mean? What do we do with it? Because words are all well and good, but if they don't do anything, yeah, that's not what I'm about. So I think that the most important thing is to recognize that we're all oppressors, because we're human. Right? So that's speciesism. We're all part of that, one way or another. Nobody's clean. Nobody's clean. And so humility, letting go of our arrogance, recognizing that we're all in this together and we're all in it with others, and that we've come to this through bits of information that others have fed us or that we've bumped into. We're indebted to others for coming into this movement and for our positions in this movement. And now we're part of helping politely, hopefully, and kindly help others to get what we've got, and to not be arrogant about that. I can remember along my way the people who've helped me, and I'm grateful for it. Even those who, are vegetarians at best, they did me a service by helping me. So we need to not be arrogant. We need to be humble, and we have to recognize ourselves as all being oppressors. And then additionally, if you're a Caucasian, if you're male, if you're young, if you don't have anything that the world considers a disability, notice how that was worded, then you will have extra things to think about with regard to letting go, with regard to standing aside, inviting others to speak, speaking up in defense of others. These are the things that we can do if we know about these oppressions and care about them. And I've kind of outlined what I would call the 4 S's, because by chance when I wrote them, they all had S's. So here are the things that I would say that we should try to do. So the first thing we need to try to do, if we understand this and accept it, and if you don't accept it, that's fine too. I'm all for carrying on the dialogue and coming up with new ideas and criticizing the old, always politely, I hope. But yes, I'm all for that as well. So the first thing I would suggest that we can all do is see our irrelevance. Irrelevance. Irrelevance being our unimportance. Recognizing our unimportance. In 50 years, most of us will be dead or very near there. 100 years. How many of you know much about your great-great-great-grandparent? Right? So this is okay. And if there's 2 hands went up, so go back 1 more, right? The point is, we're here a short time and we're gone. So recognizing that what are we here? Are we about the things we own? Are we really about producing and reproducing? What is it? We have to ask ourselves, what gives my life value here? What is it I'm about? For me, it's about activism. It's about bringing change. It's about applying myself in a way that will hopefully bring history, I don't know, be part of a change, be part of recognizing what we need to change and helping to bring that change. And that's why I sit in front of the computer way too many hours, because I'm committed to that. All right, so we have to see our own irrelevance. And if there's one thing that humanity has not done in this culture down through time, it's that. We are extremely arrogant. We think we are very important. And we completely forget that we're going to die. And we're so funny because we don't realize none of us remembers anything about people who lived 300 years ago, but we all somehow think our lives are so important. So perspective, right? Let's get it. Let's see it a little differently here. Then the next thing is, once you figure out that you're not very important, then it's much easier to let go of your privilege. You can start to try to look in yourself and see what it is I need to change. How can I be different? What can I do differently? And this is a really important one. And again, so you have to figure out where your privilege is. So I'm a Caucasian, so I have a lot of privilege there. I know what it is to have to be on the other side of oppression as a female and as somebody who doesn't read well. I'm a human and I'm a Caucasian. So I have to look out for oppressing other animals and oppressing, or not, and even not just oppressing, but failing to help those who are not Caucasians, failing to speak up for them. So seeing where we fit in this paradigm of oppression, and then the next one is to speak out. Speak out. Once you figure out how you are part of this ecofeminist dualism hierarchy and your privileges that you've gotten from that, you need to speak out. You need to speak for others. And I can say that as a female, I'm sure there are many times when I have not spoken out. I know that my voice is devalued, especially as a philosopher. The males don't even bother to invite me to theirs. I don't know if it's because I'm a vegan or a female. I can't really figure it out. But I'm kind of sidelined. So that's okay. I don't mind. But the point is, I recognize that it's happening. And I know that because I'm a female, people don't listen to me. I say things, and they just kind of look at me like, why did she say that? I get that. And it helps me understand the animals, right? Nobody listens to them. They're out there saying all sorts of things. They're screaming, and nobody cares. And I can feel that. I know what that feels like. So we need to speak out. When we recognize these sorts of things, when I recognize that someone isn't hearing another animal, I need to say, you're not listening. You're dragging your dog along on her leash, and she's unhappy, and will you please not do that? So, speaking. If you hear a homophobic joke, if you see someone trash talking against females, never be silent. Now, I will not say that, again, this is for those who are, for instance, the trash talking of females, that's a male responsibility. Right? All of us need to speak for the animals. The men need to speak up. And I'm not saying that women can't or shouldn't. I'm saying it is absolutely imperative that males do so. And it's wonderful if women can. So speaking out. And then the 4S is to subvert that dualism. So what I mean by this is when you can recognize dualism, when you can see it, when you can identify it, like, for example, the male-female, then you can start to thwart it. And again, I think the burden lies heavier on those who are in the privileged category. And one of the great things about these conferences is that you all are kind of doing a lot of this probably without too much contemplating of it. We're kind of sidelined anyway, which makes us free to be a little different. But I encourage us to think more about it and to do it even more blatantly, to not conform to the male-female norms, to not be explicitly. If you're a heterosexual and you're holding hands in public, just be aware you're enjoying your privilege. Know it. And then decide whether or not you're going to do it. If you're sitting close to someone with your arm around them, know it. If you have the confidence to say, I'd like to speak, know you're probably privileged. Probably white, more likely male than female. If you're running an organization, you're more likely to be a male. You're empowered. You haven't been all your life in a position where people humiliate you, tease you, make fun of you, in whatever way, dismiss you. Dismissal is really what I would say if I look back on my past. Dismissal. I've always been dismissed. So just know your privilege. Try to identify it. Try to see it. And then try to hand it over. Try to give it to someone else. Try to give someone else the chance to speak, to be empowered, to make decisions in your organization, in your home, in your communities, in your friendships. Be aware of your privilege. Try to take up less space. Whenever I'm sitting on the airline flying across the water, when the woman sits next to me, she doesn't take the armrest. Who takes the armrest? It's their space. They get more space than I do. They're men. So I'm always having these fights over the armrest. Politely, but clearly, that's not your armrest. I won't say it. Well, I might, but yeah. So it's these little things. It's the little things that we have to, and I'm not always up for it. Sometimes I'm too tired, and I'm just like, oh, not again. And that's why I say, men, it's your responsibility. This isn't exhausting you. You're not the ones being oppressed. And us as Caucasians, we're the ones who need to say, we're taking up too much space. Let's let this other person. Let's let the person who everyone considers disabled, let's give them a chance. Let's sit down and shut up if we're empowered. And let's give others a chance to say things. All right, I think that's all I want to say. Yeah, one more thing. Sometimes the feminists really annoy me, and I try not to be annoyed. But if you're oppressing others, just don't be asking others not to oppress you. And that's why this matters. Because as noted, anyone who is human is an oppressor. We're it. So we have to stop oppressing. And what's great about looking at these intersections is instead of us running around telling everyone else what to do, we have to stop and figure out what we need to do. And we always need to do that. We are never done doing that. This oppression runs deep. It's part of our cultures and our history and our lives, and we learn it from the cradle to the grave. And most of us live it. So we have to change it. So this calls us to change our ways. And as a movement, that's important. All right, I'm open for questions.
Any questions? Anyone?
Thank you, Lisa. That was awesome. I actually don't have a question. I've asked you questions on my radio show before, Animal Voices from Vancouver, yay. But I noticed that you said about your dog that she's nuts and crazy, and that sounds a little bit ableist to me. And I just, because I think people with mental health issues those are derogatory terms. So maybe in your future talk, you might reconsider that language, that's all.
How would I talk about my crazy, my wonderful pit bull's energy? Just give me some words. Give me some, what are they called? Adjectives.
Spirited, or willful, or
willful.
I don't know, maybe more a description of what she actually is like than the umbrella term of crazy. And I think that's a reminder maybe to all of us that we try to be really aware of the power of our words and the power of our language, and not using the word bitch and calling people out for that, because what is that about? And words like stupid and lame and all these kind of words that we have an awareness, a political awareness here, and we have to keep taking it further and keep looking and rooting out all that oppressive stuff that's in there, and it keeps cropping up, and it's like constant work to weed it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. That was fantastic. Something that's been happening within the effective activism movement, especially with Peter Singer, is using your talents to make the most money to do the most help for animals. Say working on Wall Street, if you have a talent for math or accounting or whatever. Not that I'm advocating that at all. But I was wondering what your thoughts would be on using our being Caucasian, male, or whatever, human, to take advantage of our status in the most effective way for animals, in making money or however that may come about.
That's a great question. All right, so let me clarify. I think what you're asking is, if you're empowered, finish it. You're asking, if you're empowered, what's the best way to use your power? Or are you asking, is that an acceptable way to use your power with money? Or clarify, please. And I can't find you. Where are you? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, no, if you're empowered, should you use it? Or can you use it?
I see.
If it's effective.
I would argue that you can't help but use it. If you're empowered, you're empowered. And I know that as a white person who is, I'm empowered. There's no way to get around that. So that's, I guess, the straight up response I can give you is you are going to be using your power. Then the question is how, in what ways, and the question really becomes, can you see where, and I do, most of the people in this room are going to be trying to use their power, hopefully, or at least they will afterwards, if it's not something you've thought about, to bring change and to make things better and to try to help those who are oppressed. But the challenge remains for you to find out where you haven't done that yet. And I just have had wonderful experiences in working with other people who maybe have studied and learned a lot about things, but then again, when they actually start looking, there's always more. You always can learn more about what it is you thought you knew. So looking for the oppression, the ongoing oppression in your life is the main thing, and by all means, use your power to help others in whatever ways you can. Again, being careful that in using those powers, you aren't still oppressing. And again, nothing's cut and dry. There's going to be some oppression on Wall Street, right? There's no getting around it. But you're going to have a job, you're going to be earning money, and no matter what job you have in this culture, that's why we're all oppressors. We're all part of it. We're all part of wrecking the earth and ruining things around us. And I think keeping that to a minimum is important. If you're going to have, and I think it's a choice. You can say, I'm not going to have the high-powered job. I'm going to do something where I'm going to earn a lot less, and then I'm going to do other things to try to bring change. Or you can say, well, I'm going to stick with the high-powered job, but I'm going to commit much of what I earn, much of my wealth to bringing change, and give yourself a figure that you're going to reinvest to help make up for the power and privilege and the damage done. It's a good question.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. The title of the presentation was Sister Species, and that's what drew me in. I wonder if you could tell me more about what you perceive the arc of awareness is for humans and women and mothers beginning to understand how their food choices would be so painful if they, in fact, experienced them. If somebody took their baby's breast milk or took their baby away from them, it's definitely a big, painful issue for me that many people don't see that. So I definitely get triggered around it. But what do you think the arc of awareness is at right now, and where is it going?
Arc of awareness, what do you mean by that?
How prevalent is the idea that, oh, I wouldn't want my baby to be taken from me. Why would I want that cow to lose her baby? How prevalent is that awareness in our culture right now? And the arc I'm talking about is a projection about how much more aware we might become. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yes, it does. My sense is that it's going to depend on where you are. I live in Montana. The arc of awareness is almost non-existent. Right? So apparently, I was talking to Heiko in Germany. There's he says if he has the conference there, he'd have many, many more participants. So there's more awareness there. So it's really going to depend on where you are. And also it's going to depend on who you hang out with. And I know Breeze Harper, if you talk to her, one of the problems with this movement is that we are too white. And we talk about things like veganism as if it was an option for everybody. It's not. Sad to say, it's just not. And that doesn't mean we should accept the exploitation and damage of animals. It means we need to get the reality there, that if you live in a really poor place, or if you're and I know people in Montana who are under the pressure of men who you cook meat for them, or you're going to have to find somewhere else to live. So it is not an option for everyone. And recognizing that it has to do with power, having these options. I have the option to be a vegan because I am not among the most oppressed, that I have those freedoms and am somewhat empowered. So the arc is going to be very different depending on where you live, where you fit in these oppressions, who you are. And to me, if you are the less intersections, the less categories you fit into in the not A side, the better chance you have, and the more resistant you're going to be, would be my sense.
I wanted to say thank you because when I was formulating the question, I knew there was something about myself I wasn't seeing, and you're now reflecting that back to me so I can have humility. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
A question over there? Okay. Coming. Excuse me. Oh, I had to choose this one. Sorry.
Hello. I have kind of a remark. It's not a question, actually. Your solution concepts, this was humility, irrelevance, and stuff like this. I think they're quite dangerous, actually, because it's not irrelevance, it's relevance. Because I do my things because I think I am relevant, you're relevant, this dog is relevant. That's my, not solution, that's my just way of thinking.
And you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and humility the same. I think these are concepts that were just exploited by religions, for example, very just too often. And it's just a concept that stabilizes what's going on more than it provokes change or enables change in the end effect. So I think maybe it's just a problem with the formulations, but...
No, you're right. You're absolutely on target. And I should say more about it. And I kind of was aware of that when I moved on, that I hadn't said quite enough. And I'm not sure I can say enough to put aside all of those fears. But I think, the first thing I would say is, we don't seem to have a problem as human beings with too much humility. So I worry less about, when I say to recognize our irrelevance, I worry less about making people feel completely irrelevant than I do about trying to knock down some of that human sense of entitlement and that all about us is so important. Because I think we carry that into our consumerism and our so many things that are so damaging. And I think it's good. I think actually we are healthier and happier when we can let go of that. So it is my interest in helping all of us that makes me say it. And when I say it, I don't mean it in the sense that no one matters, right? I'm obviously an activist. I said my life is about trying to bring change, about trying to help others, about trying to work with. And anyone who knows me knows that the last thing I want is conflict, or I just am not that kind of person. I care a lot. It's who I am. And so in the context of that, I think that recognizing our irrelevance isn't about feeling truly like we are relevant in the sense of that our lives don't matter. Every life matters, and obviously I live that. That's who I am. But it doesn't mean that we matter in the sense of the importance that most of us tend to be given by our culture. What matters about us is something very different than that. So recognizing that if we're too focused on material things, our car, our computer, on how others, it's not good for us and it's not good for the world if our sense of self makes us feel entitled. So that's one part. Now the other thing I will add to that is, and this is the part that is really important that I add, is that if you are in these categories, it's a less so situation. So if you are in the A category, get busy with it. You got all the, you probably have everything thrown at you from the day you were born that's going to make you feel like you are more important than really the earth can sustain you thinking. But if you're in the other categories, chances are pretty good people have been knocking you down since the day you were born. And then I don't want that to become a matter of you thinking less of yourself. But maybe it can help those who are oppressed to say, I know that what matters about me aren't these things for which I'm oppressed. Those things are irrelevant. What matters about me is something very different, something very central and essential that everybody has. And then the oppressions become less important. So that's a much fuller presentation of why this irrelevancy matters and how it has to indeed be used with gentleness and carefulness so that people, those who are empowered, need to recognize that their power is important if they're using it to bring change, but not for most of the things our culture tells us matter. And for those who are disempowered, recognizing that the irrelevancy should give them power, should recognize as well that those things that the culture says are important really aren't. It's something quite other. Do you want to say more? Do you still...
Maybe we just talk after the talk.
Good, good.
Okay, I think we have time for one more short question over there.
Well, I really enjoyed your talk. I found it really interesting and illuminating. And I just jotted down a few points that I thought that just occurred to me. I mean, one interesting thing is the whitening of the animal rights movement, and that reflects, white dominance generally. But it's also very culturally ignorant because, the animal rights movement didn't start with white people. It started in other parts of the world. Well, not started, but, in India, for example, which, of course, is a problematic country, but, there were animal shelters long before, the RSPCA in England or, animal welfare societies here, most of which started, I think, 100 years ago, or the first animal rights legislation, not an animal welfare legislation in Europe, was in the 1800s, I think, probably England as the first country to introduce animal welfare legislation. But anyway, there's also this cultural ignorance, also the fact, that there are vegan traditions or animal rights traditions and threads of compassion in other cultures. There's a thread of which aren't known about. In Islam and Judaism, which I don't know much about, but there are threads of compassion. There's also, even in Rastafarianism, there's a thread of veganism in Rastafarianism. So, that doesn't really get any attention. And I think that, that's something, I think also, it shouldn't
before
happen.
You continue, let me just say I've written a book called Animals and Religions. It gets attention. It's one of my focuses is religion and the intersections there.
Oh, I'll try and get hold of a copy. Well, I think, from a tactical point of view, it's so unwise because animal rights, and I'm sure everyone here agrees, it's got to be global. For any chance for animals to have any kind of protection, animal rights has got to be global.
Yes, and it's really, really important how, if we're going to be the empowered people going around telling other nations how to do things, that's not going to work. We have to, again, this is where recognizing our own irrelevancy, that we're part of the oppression, and helping to empower others to bring the changes that are appropriate to their communities rather than going in there and telling them what to do. It's just an example of recognizing, seeing ourselves first before we speak to others.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then just quickly, the other thing, you talked about oppression, and one of the problems with recognizing oppression or dealing with oppression is the fact that it's so subtle. And you mentioned Breeze Harper, and I think it was Breeze Harper who talks about microaggressions of daily life. And it's, anyway, that's just because one of the ways that oppression is also enforced is through othering, you know, the othering of whatever, that, you know, the other race or the animal, you know, making it the other. Yeah, okay, sorry.
Yeah, a good point. And it brings back to it's a great place to close because it brings it back to the first point where I had said something that I shouldn't. That yes, it's an endless quest. It's the micro stuff. It's the little stuff, and all of us are called to task all the time. And luckily, I think we know that we're not done. We're not finished products. The trick's to remember that when we're talking to others who are perhaps still eating meat, who are in a different space than we are, remembering that we also are incomplete. How would we want others to approach us? What were we like then? And there's of course different ways of approaching others, but always remember that it's a path, it's a trajectory, and we're all along it. And if compassion is what we're about, and if we want to bring change, it has to start. It does start with us, and it doesn't just start with us being activists. It has to affect how we are activists and how we live.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you very much.